Have you ever imagined that the line between the online world and the real world could become so thin? So thin that it leads to unimaginable things. This time we will dissect a tragic case from a quiet suburb in Florida, where an obsession in the virtual world turned into horror in the real world. Okay, let's get started. We begin the story on the morning of January 25th, 2019. A man, Grant Amato, suddenly didn't show up for work. This was very strange because in 5 years he had never been absent once. His colleagues were immediately suspicious that something was wrong. This constant event would trigger an emergency call and a request for a welfare check at the Amato family home. And that suspicion is what finally made them call 911. In that call, Cody's colleague expressed deep concern. He mentioned that his friend's brother was struggling with depression. But they had no idea that the reality they were about to find was far, far more horrifying than that. When the police finally arrived at the house, what they found were 3 members of the Amato family. All were deceased: Cody the son, Margaret the mother, and Chad the father. An entire family, except for one person, was gone. The condition inside the house was truly horrifying. Just imagine, Cody was found lying on the floor with his lunchbox still near him. His mother, Margaret, was in her office chair, and his father, Chad, was in the kitchen. All died from gunshot wounds. The big question immediately rose: who did all of this? It didn't take long for this investigation to point to one person. The focus immediately turned to the one family member who survived and was not at the scene: Grant Amato, their son, who was 29 years old at the time. Now this is a very interesting part. Look at the contrast. Previously, Grant was a nurse and even a competitive weightlifter. Cool, right? But in June 2018, his life began to fall apart. He was suspended from his job at a hospital because he was suspected of stealing medication. Since being unemployed, he spent most of his time in front of the computer. And it was precisely because he was unemployed that he got pulled into an online world that eventually consumed his life and destroyed his family. This is a story about how a fantasy in the virtual world turned into a motive for murder in the real world. Grant became obsessed with a webcam model from Bulgaria who went by the name Sylvie. He spent hours and thousands of dollars just to watch Sylvie, sent her gifts, and even lied to create a false image of himself as a wealthy and successful man. In reality, this relationship was one-sided and only existed in the virtual world. So the question is, where did he get that much money? Investigators believe Grant stole more than $200,000, that's over 3 billion rupiah, from his father and brother. He drained their accounts just to fund this obsession. Obviously, his family was very frustrated seeing Grant's behavior because he kept lying and stealing. They had tried to help him, even sending him to a rehabilitation center for internet addiction. But when he returned, his family gave him one final choice: an ultimatum. This timeline shows how quickly the situation spiraled out of control. After returning from rehab, it turns out Grant didn't stop. On January 24th, his father caught him still contacting Sylvie. That same night, they had a major argument. And the next morning, well, we know what happened. His entire family was found dead. Essentially, his father, Chad, gave 3 very simple rules for Grant. First, find a job. Second, attend therapy. And the last one, and most importantly, stop contacting Sylvie. These rules were intended for his well-being, to pull him back to the real world. But for Grant, rule number 3 was a deal breaker. He couldn't accept it. A few days after the bodies were found, Grant Amato was finally arrested. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Now let's see how this case unfolded in court. In court, these arguments from both sides were truly war. The prosecutor was certain Grant had a clear motive: money and anger over the family's ultimatum. They also said Grant deliberately staged the crime scene. On the other hand, his lawyer argued there was no direct physical evidence, no weapon, no fingerprints. They accused the police of being too hasty in reaching a conclusion. The prosecution's case largely relied The prosecution case largely relied on the irregularities at the scene. For instance, they pointed out a pistol placed near Cody to make it look like a suicide. However, there was another pistol near the father, Chad, placed in a holster on his right hip but positioned to be drawn with the left hand, and Chad was not left-handed. Small points like these showed an attempt to deceive the police. Ultimately, the juror had to decide if all the circumstantial evidence was strong enough to prove Grant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And this was their decision. On July 31st, 2019, after only a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Grant Amato guilty on 3 counts of murder against his own family. The jury recommended a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. They rejected the death penalty. This means Grant Amato will spend the rest of his life in prison. Amidst all these horrifying details, it's important for us to remember the victims. Grant's other brother, Jason, who happened not to live in that house, gave a truly touching statement about the loss of his family. This reminds us all that behind this case, there is a real human tragedy. The case of Grant Amato leaves us with one question that is honestly unsettling. How thin is the line between online fantasy and tragedy in the real world? This case serves as a grim reminder that the obsessions we build in the virtual world can have very real and devastating consequences. What lesson can we take from this? Perhaps that is what we should reflect on together.